So welcome everyone, get comfortable.
So Anglophone East is on March break this week, so they're probably taking advantage of the fact that they know we are recording this webinar, so.
Yeah, definitely, that is the.
And for those of you that don't know, this is my partner in crime over here, Tracy Landry. So we are partnered. Tracy is the First Nations Education Coordinator with Anglophone East. And we are partnered in these webinars, and we're motoring right along. They're coming along really great. We've had upwards to 100 people practically in every one so far. So
yeah, it's come quickly, definitely quickly.
Yeah.
So Patty, take it away.
So I'd like to welcome everyone here today, and I'm going to ask my colleague Amanda Marin to do our opening prayer.
Julio and Patty. Because I'm joining from Wolastoqey homelands, I wanted to do an opening in the language. Wolaza weltamodine chiu bamau suwagan naga chiu suragek. Wuliwan chiu samagwan madachwen getawismu. Wuliwan chiu biskikul naga walima huskil. Wuliwan chiu mejawagan walam waligazigultuak ni janak. Wuliwan chiu bizwan wedgie gizi bizultiuk. Wuliwan chiu kchik chiu abaziak wikbiak naga stakwinuk. Wuliwan chiu weasizik naga zitzizik. Wuliwan chiu wajausin naga elek. Wuliwan chiu gizos ni bausid naga basazamuk. Wuliwan chiu kachimento naga kachinawisk chiu psudagek. Nidleach naga psundol nabamek. So let us give thanks for life and for everything. Thank you for the water so that no one will be thirsty. Thank you for the grass and sweet grass. Thank you for the food so that we can raise our children strong and healthy. Thank you for medicines so we can cure our illnesses. Thank you for the forest, the trees, the fir trees, and ash trees. Thank you for the little animals and little birds. Thank you for the wind and the rain. Thank you for the sun, the moon, and the stars. Thank you to the great spirits, masculine and feminine, for everything. May that be the truth in all my relations.
Well, Lala and Amanda. And Amanda has has another thing to her credit, and that is she is very much the partner of a Mount Allison grad. Good choice, Amanda.
Yes, I am.
Spencer Isaac, for those of you that were here when Spencer was here. Kiara, did you know Spencer?
A little bit.
Yeah.
I think my first year would have been his last year.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So I'd like to thank you, especially Trenton, Amanda, Caitlin, for agreeing to take part in this webinar today, and to Rowan, Amber, Gabrielle, and Kiara. And I think it's really important that we talk about barriers for post-secondary with Indigenous students from both the student perspective and from our perspective as advisors, because as we share this with Anglophone East and with our individual campuses, it's really great that they will be able to hear from students what they can do differently, and for us what we could do differently even. So I think it goes without saying that we truly appreciate it, and because of the nature of this virtual event, I'm unable to offer you tobacco physically, but I will from Canada Post. So Walalan for being here. And Natasha, thank you for being here with us too. You've been amazingly supportive since you came on our team for Future Wabanagi, and so thank you for that. she takes every opportunity she can to learn. So big props to you, Natasha. So Tracy, do you want to start or? Yeah.
Well, I would like to acknowledge that we are virtually gathering in Wabanaki territory, and here in the east, in Mi'kma'ki, and in the west, in Wolastoqey territory, and of course in Pescatawamekadi. I do believe we have some folks that might be joining us from there as well, which is 3 of the 5 tribes that make up the Wabanaki, or the people of the Dawn. So it's really interesting. I love to use a territorial acknowledgement within the context of what we do in schools as an educational tool, because one of the things that I've noticed as a settler is that oftentimes it's treated in a way that's offhand or a checklist kind of thing, and people say things along the lines of, okay, now let's get on to the agenda. And that's something I've definitely taken to heart with my Indigenous advisory group, and we've talked about using it in a good way, ensuring that it's used as an educational tool and as a way to honor the First Peoples here. So I do appreciate all the folks who have joined us here in the middle of a March break week. And Patty, I really love that we're doing this together and just making it happen, because it happened quite quickly in a whirlwind. So thanks so much for all of you coming on, and well, Alan, thanks.
Thanks, Tracy. So I'm thinking that one of the things we could do is go in a circle, and that means that Caitlin is first because she's in the top left-hand corner for me. And I thought we would go around the circle and talk about, maybe give a couple of points of what do you see as the barriers for Indigenous students in post-secondary. And then we will continue going around in a circle and discuss things a little bit more in depth. And keep in mind that the people that will be viewing this, that will really need to hear this, are, you know, teachers, guidance counselors, leadership at our universities, so that the change makers, right? Because we are the change makers. And I think that our universities and school districts really want to be change makers too. So let's help them by giving them good advice and do it in a good way. And you don't need to hold back. Certainly you share what you want to share from your heart and go for it. Caitlin Copage, all the way from Sebaganagadi, who lives in Fredericton and works as the Experiential Learning Future Wabanaki Coordinator at UNB.
Hi. Thanks for the introduction. I think, so just a little bit about my educational background. I did my undergrad in St. Mary's, and I did an honors in philosophy with a minor in religious studies and theology. And then I moved to Fredericton and did my master's in education and critical studies at UNB, just graduating in 2019 before taking the job that I have now as the experiential education coordinator, which is still a mouthful and I can't say. And one of the barriers that I've found both as a student, but also as a coordinator in post-secondary institutions is, and you said not to beat around the bush and to just lay it all out. So I'm just going to lay it all out and hopefully speak directly, and that's okay.
We are being recorded.
The F-bombs will stay internal, but the honesty will come out. One of my biggest challenges has been faculty and educator education and their own personal knowledge of Indigenous ways of knowing, being, and doing at all in general, more specifically to the context of Wabanaki. But I often found myself having to educate my professors as a student. And I feel I can't complain so much now because I get paid to do it as part of my coordinator role. So I can't really complain too much now that it's still a part of my post-secondary experience. But that was something that I found really strugglesome as a student, trying to keep up with everything that I was learning in my philosophy courses, especially. And then when I would inquire about Indigenous philosophies, all of my educators would tell me that that didn't exist, that that wasn't a thing. So it took me until my 4th year to get up enough courage to like speak back to that and realize that I could explore that on my own. But then again, you're doing all of that additional education on top of your full-time studies, your degree studies. So yeah, that's all I'd like to say for now. Next, can I say that? Next.
Thanks, Caitlin. So next, I have Gabrielle Brochu, who is one of our Mount Allison grads this coming year. And Gabrielle is going on to take her her graduate degree in, go for it, Gabrielle.
Hopefully opera performance. So I'm in my 5th year, wrapping up 2 degrees. I'm doing a BA in math and a Bachelor of Music. And one of the biggest barriers is just the lack of representation in the music field, and really just a general acknowledgement of the contributions of Indigenous peoples in the music field. There were 3 classes total that actually went into depth about an Indigenous composer or a performer or yada yada yada, and one of them was an independent study that I made myself. So yeah.
Thanks, Gabrielle. Next is the lovely Amber Solomon from Kingsclear First Nation. Amber is in her 2nd year at Mount Allison University. Take it away, Amber. Tell us about yourself.
I'm trying to do a double major in sociology and geography and environment. I think like within the sociology department, like a lot of my professors have been very like understanding, but I feel like in addition to what you say, Caitlin, like about like educating your professors, I think that's definitely like a barrier where I feel like I'm taking on like a double role and like using like 2 separate worldviews and like trying to combine them together. And like sometimes I feel as though like maybe like I'm incorporating that too much, but I know like that's what I'm passionate about. And like even if it's not like integral to the assignment, like I always try and center like my indigeneity within the work that I do. So like having some like having the course open to that inclusivity is like what is important to me. Yeah.
Thanks, Amber. Amber also writes for the Mount Allison newspaper, the Argosy, just so you know. Next, Rowan White. Rowan comes from Halapu First Nation in Newfoundland. She's a 2nd year fine arts student. It's fine arts, eh? No, sorry. Shame. And Rowan has a great deal of knowledge and self-awareness, and I know she has a lot to share with us today.
Yeah, so my big thing I wanted to talk about is some of the systemic barriers preventing students from accessing university in the first place. A lot of people don't know that in a lot of places, if you don't have your tuition covered by your band, which is run by lottery and by grades, then you can't actually qualify for a government student loan. These are just one tiny example of some of the structures that are put in place to keep Indigenous students away from academia in the first place. But we could talk at length about youth imprisonment, poverty, and all of these things that don't give high school students and other people before they get to university the same standing ground as when they reach university, and how they can often be left behind their peers.
Thanks, Rowan. Well said. Next in my circle, I have Trenton Augustine. Trenton, who is the equivalent to Patty at STU, St. Thomas University, and who's also one of the leads for Future Wabanaki for experiential learning. Go ahead, Trenton.
Thank you, Patty. Yeah, I'm the Indigenous Student Services Coordinator at STU. I've been here now almost 5 years. It seems like it's only been 2 years, but and I was also at UNB before coming over to STU, and I worked there for a few years as well. So I've been working at the universities now probably about 7-8 years. So I do have a bit of experience. I do have a long list of things that I wrote down, but I'll just touch on a few things. I think one of the bigger barriers for students is the transition to university. And I always bring this up because I went through that myself. So many students are coming from small, rural, isolated communities, and just that transition to moving to a bigger community, or to a city, and also a bigger school, that is totally different from what they know of. So they're dealing with that transition. Students are also learning a lot of life skills, like the first time they have to pay rent, first time they have to budget their money, first time they have to be independent, and there's just so much that students have to learn. And I say that because that's what happened to me when I started at university. So I think that's a big thing. A lot of students are missing their community, their family, their friends, their cousins, their social networks. Usually, like, these universities are pretty far away from like their community, so it's just a different way of life. And Amber touched on it a bit, that they have to adjust to a different worldview. It's basically a different way of life. It's totally different. And I know that myself, having to live in two worlds, right? Like, when I go home to my community, it's totally different way of life. Interactions are different. The way people talk to each other are different. And so yeah, and then you have to kind of readjust to a different world outside of the community and learn how that works. And so students are learning how everything works their first semester or their first year of university. And so not only that, they're struggling with their academics because all these other things are coming first, right? And then they struggle with their academics, and then yeah, it's just a hard time. And that's one of the things that I wanted to bring up. But I'll hand it off to the next person.
Thanks, Trenton. Awesome points. I think that one of the things that I see and have seen for the last 11 years is that our students come in from various places, different high schools in different areas. One thing stays the same. It's almost as though unless they went to a high school with very few Indigenous students, they have come from high schools that have dumbed down their curriculum for them, particularly here in New Brunswick. The curriculum has been, without their knowledge, they have been put in a kind of a dumbed down curriculum where they struggle even more when they come to university. They have no idea, a lot of students have no idea how to manage that and how, so you do end up having to establish some sort of assistance for that, like to be there, be the advisor, be the helper, reach out to the faculty to let them know what's happening. And that kind of leads to mental health issues, depression, maybe even leads them to quit. And so those are the things that we're looking at. And when we established our bridging program last year, it wasn't to provide them with the opportunity to take high school classes at university. It was the opportunity to say, okay, you don't have to take as many courses so that you won't be so overwhelmed. And so that's one of the things that we did, and we could talk more about that later, but I'm going to turn it over to my friend Amanda Myron. Amanda, could you tell us what your title is?
Certainly. Kweb Sude Wen, and Lewis Amanda, Naganil Dakota, Sue Abbott, Nujaya Wolostaguk, Naganil Biluida Hazuin at UNB. So I felt it was important to introduce myself because it's really important to honor the ancestors that I come from, who are a strong lineage of Dakota on my maternal side. But I've been born and raised in Wolastoqey territory, and my mother married into the Wolastoqey Nation. So I did grow up on Woodstock First Nation. I'm Biluida Hazuin at UNB, and that's a Wolastoqey word that means one who promotes change in a good way towards truth. And the colonial title of that position would be the Assistant VP of Indigenous Engagement. And I report directly to the president at UNB. Biluida Hazuin comes from a Wolastoqey teaching of reconciliation, gifted by Elder Ablosomwis Imelda Pearlie. And it comes from the word Biluida Hazu Azu Wagan, which means to change minds and live the truth. And I think that speaks to how this work should be done. It has to be done by centering, in particular, Wabanaki worldviews in this territory, but it has to center and foreground Indigenous history, experiences, and knowledges. And it has to be done in relationship with the people. Otherwise, it could be a recolonizing effort. I think what I would share is going to overlap and complement and probably elevate what folks have shared already. But I think one of the barriers in post-secondary is the erasure and absence of Indigenous histories, experiences, and knowledges. And the way that Indigenous education has been approached historically, and it continues to perpetuate itself today, is that Indigenous students are a problem to be fixed. And this is not at all the truth. And if anything, I feel that sort of replicates this colonial idea that we continue to be an Indian problem. I think what Canadian post-secondary has to grapple with is the idea that there are structures and systems, whether that be education, health, the legal system, that comes from a Euro-Canadian standpoint. That those systems and structures were built not for Indigenous people and not by Indigenous people, but they come from Western frameworks of being in the world. And it's no different for universities or colleges. Those systems and structures are Eurocentric, and part of the work of reconciliation, or Biluida Hazu Azu Wagan, is to help Indigenous folks reclaim that space, not making space for us, not accommodating, not inclusion, because we've been here since time immemorial, but allowing us to reclaim our rightful space on our ancestral homelands. And with that work has to be led by Indigenous peoples. And post-secondary, among other institutions, very much struggles with underrepresentation or an absence of representation of Indigenous folks, not just among instructors and professors, but in all levels of decision-making and administration. And we belong in spaces where decisions are going to be made that affect us, and that is all decision-making spaces. So yeah, I think I want to impart like those two key messages is that I think some of the struggles that Indigenous students, faculty, and staff struggle alike is the erasure of who we are as people in these institutions and our serious underrepresentation at all levels. So thank you for letting me share.
Well, and Amanda. Natasha, would you like to share? I know you're working with Indigenous students at U2M, so maybe you could give us a perspective from your eyes, actually.
You know that the language is a little barrier for me in the start,
okay,
so I will just say it. The thing is, Patty, that, you know, it's with the Indigenous Center, it's all new in the organization. And there is no Indigenous Center, neither in Moncton, neither in Shippagan. What I found since the beginning of that adventure for me is that a lack of intentions. It's really important for me that it's not just a matter of what you say, but how do you say it? And if you put the power in your intentions. I don't want you to bad take me, but you know, just saying something like you said, Tracy, just to say the recognition in the beginning of ceremony didn't mean you understand and you really understand the words. And I would say it's the main commentary that I have to give you today. And I really question myself and I question the projects that are put on together. And I really, is it just a checkup on the list to be politically correct? Or do you have the real intentions? Because for me, there's some racism, systemic racism going on just by teaching your professor, as you say it. It's the lack, it's like the reference base. It should be before teaching. Just go and just do your work, just to know about the community, know the names of the community. It's really amazing. It's like, and I would not thought it was that big. They don't know the nations, they don't know the communities. And I don't want to put the blame just on the professor. It's all of the system. And we say we want to get back and integrate the Indigenous way. It's not to integrate, it's to let it be. And the way the Indigenous do things, it's not the same way. So I'm a little bit, because yeah, okay. You know what I mean. You know what I mean? So the biggest thing is just to put the intentions in the project that you put in place. Yeah, and the real things. Yeah, thank you.
Natasha?
Yeah?
I apologize to you that I don't speak French.
Okay.
But
Okay.
I'm going to tell you that you just rocked that in English.
Oh, arrête.
Thank you.
Je vais te le dire en français, t'es trop fine. You're too smart with me. Okay.
Merci. Kiara Bubar is another one of my grads this year. I'm going to be missing all these people. Kiara is graduating from psychology and off to grad school next year. And she's a member of Lennox Island First Nation in PEI, but grew up in Woodstock. So Kiara, what would you like to share?
Oh, there's a lot I could share.
Well,
But,
lay it on us.
well, most everyone has already touched on it. But something I was thinking of when Gabrielle and Amber were talking about the challenges within their specific programs. As a science student coming into post-secondary as an Indigenous student, I felt so out of place because they give off this this impression that you can't have scientific knowledge and traditional knowledge coexisting in the same space. So I felt very at odds with myself. Like, how am I supposed to practice my culture and know what I know, but also subscribe to this scientific colonial way of doing things? So, I mean, at first it was a really hard adjustment to kind of grapple with that within myself. And I feel like that's not a unique experience within Indigenous students that want to go into the sciences. It there's this notion that you kind of have to set aside who you are culturally and spiritually in order to be a scientific person. But what I've learned over the years is that that is not at all true. You can, that's the principles of two-eyed seeing both sides, integrating them together. So I think, in particular with the sciences, a lot of people within Indigenous communities are kind of scared away from the sciences, which it really sucks because Indigenous people make amazing scholars and researchers and doctors, et cetera, et cetera. So, we need more of that. We shouldn't be scaring people away because, scientific knowledge and traditional knowledge aren't compatible when they absolutely are. You just kind of have to change the way you look at it, not looking at it from a colonial perspective, but looking at it from two-eyed seeing. So yeah, as a science student, that was probably my main struggle. The first one that really hit me square in the face. First day taking my bio courses, my chemistry courses, I was like, what is going on here? Like, do I have to put my culture away to be a scientific person in academia? And the answer is no. I can be Indigenous and scientific. And if anything, they complement each other. So yeah, those are my 2 cents for now.
Thanks, Kiara. And if there are any post-secondary grads in the audience that are not on camera that would like to share any of their post-secondary barriers as Indigenous students, feel free to speak up. Because I can see one down there.
Yeah, the one who's my biggest fan.
Yes, that one.
Okay. The one who stole my dog.
The one who's a Mount Allison grad, even.
The one named Spencer Isaac.
Yeah.
I couldn't just listen, could I?
No.
No, all right.
We all shared your YouTube video, so
I guess I owe you one, huh?
a little payback.
Yeah. Well, okay, so my name is Spencer Isaac. I'm from the Stigos First Nation. So I had attended my first time, I guess, in university was 2012 when I started my degree at Mount A, and I had gone there from 2012, and I took my time and finished in 2018, and I graduated with ironically a degree in Canadian Studies and anthropology and geography. So just a funny way to like flip the table, studying the white people because they're always studying us, right? So I finished that, and I kind of have two different kinds of experiences with university, UNB and Mount A. And at Mount A, I had gone there because I had family there. My brother was there, my cousin Maddie they were both there. And other than that, that was really the only decision, the only thing that like influenced my decision to go to that particular school. And actually, like I was one of I guess the founding like founding members of the Indigenous student group at Mount A. How it came to be wasn't exactly ideal, considering that it was founded based on creating a group of Indigenous students who could be there to support each other during the I guess like the initial blow of Chris Metallic going this one, which was my brother. So we actually created this group of Indigenous students to kind of like support each other, hold each other up, and grow and be there for each other. Um, and as time has moved on, like we that collection of Indigenous people, we had a few Mi'kmaq, we had a couple of Wolastoqey people, we had a couple Inuit students. So that collection of people, actually, we just started getting to talking about like what's missing at Mount A, and like we were really kind of on our own as Indigenous students in that process to like, I don't know, I guess like get our cultures or get our identities to not only be recognized but to be valid um, uh, avenues of knowledge. Okay. I'm thinking back at this, it is like it seems so long ago, but we created this society, and it started off as like a small little group, and we actually had to like register as like a club and society at Mount Allison. So just like a little blip in the student union body. And I remember myself and Madeline Metallic, we started kind of like putting things together and thinking about like how we could expand this. And the next year after that, um, Emma Hassensall joined us. Hassensall Pearly, she joined our group and our efforts, and we started kind of like going to the then vice president, being like, other universities are doing this. Other universities are working towards like creating like Indigenous supports, Indigenous resources. Mount A has nothing. What's going on? I remember he was like, well, and we're not quite sure like how to do this, and we wouldn't know how to do it. So we spent like 2 weeks like researching, I think we had like a stack of papers like this high that we put on his desk, showing him like exactly what other universities are doing, what they're missing, and everything. All in all, like we did get like a group, but I know at Mount A it's still growing. I know there's still a lot of work to be done. So I guess like my experience with that, like the first time like where I kind of took control of my own like journey as an Indigenous student university was like actually like trying to like prove to these like institutions that like not like we belong here, like and more than just belong, is that this is our territory, these are our lands, like you're here, you're our guest, right? So why are you welcome, or like having a table for us, right? Like this is our house, right? you know um so that was at Mount A. And I guess like another experience I could share was at my Bachelor of Education program here. um I believe I'm the only Indigenous uh, teacher candidate at the 10-month program. I might be wrong on that, but as far as I can tell, I'm the only one. And I wanted to take Mi'kmaq language as like something part of my program, but because it's not necessarily coded as an education class, I had to um, jump through a bunch of hoops, and those hoops were on fire, and they were sharks trying to bite at you. There was all kinds of obstacles and everything trying to get that. And when I asked and I requested it, it was Amanda helped me out with this. Actually, she might be able to recall the story better than I can, but basically it wasn't deemed as like a teachable or anything like that, and I had to fight to prove that like no, like as a Mi'kmaq educator, it is like fundamental that I continue to learn my language and learn my culture in order to fulfill that role as a Nijikanamawit or as a teacher, right? So it took about 2 weeks of emails going back and forth, and them telling Amanda that she can't help me as Bilawida Haswin because she was my partner, and then me kind of confronting the dean of education pretty much by myself to like state my case. So I guess like the long that's the long story of like saying like as Indigenous students, like when you realize just how much power you have, like you go ahead and you go use that and you fight for whatever it is that Indigenous students need, because whatever you do might set precedent for future Indigenous students. Like leaving Mount A, and now there's the Indigenous Student Society that I believe Patty and Kiara are like doing a great job with kind of heading. I'm hoping that other Mi'kmaq students who take the education program know what I did and can say, hey, this guy did it, so why can't we do it again? So just like take control of your power.
Spencer, you'll be happy to know that all of the students that are on the panel from Mount Allison are all part of the Mount Allison Indigenous Student Support Group, and they do an amazing job. Kiara and Raven Stephen are the co-chairs, but you know, for our students that are second years, they will be following in their footsteps and you know, stepping up to be the president and the co-chair and the part of the executive. So I'm really excited to see what the new executive will do. So Spencer, props to you for starting the Indigenous Student Support Group and for being brave enough to speak your truth. And there's not a day that goes by that we don't remember why that student support group was started. And there's not a day that goes by that we don't honor that. So thank you for that. Tracy, I know that you had a couple of questions that you were going to lead us in, so you can use your circle because it's probably different than my circle.
I'm not even sure. Well, people touched on some of the things that Patty and I had kind of dreamed and schemed about. The intent of bringing folks together is to let folks like me who are in the education setting or system know what can we do better. Like that is the intent of our time here today. And so I'll just put an open-ended question out and kind of go around. And if you want to say something to it, that's cool. And if you want to text it, that's cool. And I would encourage other folks who are observing here today to put some questions in the text box if there's anything that comes up for you. But I come from the education system, the public education system, K to 12. And so my question today is it touches on someone who was talking about transitions. What would you folks wish would have been done better to help prepare you for the transition from high school into university? And I know we've spoken a little bit about that, so I'm going to ask if you have anything to add to that, because that is the audience I want to prepare potentially, is our guidance counselors and our transition teams in high schools. So if I look at my circle, Trenton is in my top left. So Trenton, what would you like to see to help better with transitioning from high school to university?
Yeah, everything. There's just so much to pinpoint, but there's just right from K to 12, we need to have more Indigenous teachers, more Indigenous administration. We need more Indigenous content and courses. We need to be recognized as official languages and be taught in classrooms, Mi'kmaq, Maliseet, or Wolastoqey, and other languages. Yeah, it just needs more representation in schools, more courses with Indigenous content, and histories, accurate histories. Because I know when I went through school, I didn't learn about the true histories and to the extent of what happened until I got to university. So proper education, right from the get-go, treaty education, what these laws mean, such as the Indian Act, and how like all these major things that has happened, like the intergenerational effects of Indian residential schools, Indian day schools, 60 Scoop, and just pretty much there's just so much to do, and we need Amanda like touched on it a little bit, but we need representation at committees, at these different boards that actually make decisions, and we need representation in our governments, local government, provincial government, and federal government. Indigenous representation and people there to fight for us and advocate for us to bring fundamental change to the way these systems work. And yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Well, Ellen, Trenton, thank you so much. Caitlin, you're next in the circle of what I'm seeing. What would you add to that?
Sorry to cough in everyone's ear. Excuse me. I think what I'd like to add on that is Amanda also touched on this earlier, and I think everyone else did too, just in using different language. I think a helpful transition would be from viewing Indigenous students as the problem, and transition that view to the education system itself and the curricula itself and the uneducation in the education system to Indigenous ways of knowing, being, and doing. When I was in high school, which was like 10 years ago, so it was a little while ago, but I felt so stupid. I was like, I was streamlined into all of the courses that weren't needed for college because that's not where I was going to go. And like, it is a surprise that I graduated from high school, but also once I got into St. Mary's, I was a straight A and B student for my first 2 years, and from there was a straight A student. So it was a really big transition for me to have my own internal gifts honored in the education that I was engaging with, and that allowed me to see that I wasn't as dumb and unable to be educated or participate in the education system like I had been trained to think so in high school. Yeah.
Thank you, Caitlin. Patty, you're in the next box. It's like romper room all the time, isn't it? Or something like that. Patty, go ahead.
Some people are too young to remember romper room.
Most of the people here are too young to remember romper room.
So I think for me, not growing up in a community, but going to a Catholic elementary school and then junior high and then high school, because the Catholic kids went to a different junior high than the kids who were not Catholic. And so Member 2 First Nation kids and off reserve First Nation kids all went to the same school with the non-Indigenous kids. So I think that one of my most profound memories of school before going on to post-secondary was that I was really dumb. I couldn't pay attention. I talked too much. I was fat. I needed to lose weight. I had really bad acne, and it must have been something that I was eating at home. And because my dad was a steel worker, it was kind of like one of those implications that we were really, really poor. And so what were we eating that was causing my face to be that bad? I remember being put in the front of the class with my hair, this nun taking my hair like this and saying, "Look at that acne. Does anybody have any tips?" I was in grade 5. And I remember afterwards being told in junior high and in elementary school that you know, if you sit with the native kids that are from the reserve, you will get lice, and they're very dirty. And so this was very obvious, like very it was very vocal. Like we all had to deal with that. And by the time I got to high school, I was full-blown alcoholic, because that's how I coped. My friends and I, that's how we coped. And so in high school, I was told by yet another nun that they would pass me if I agreed not to take math in grade 11 or 12. If they would pass me in grade 10 math if I agreed not to take it. And so my parents at the time said, well, I guess you're going to have to go along with that, or else you're going to have to go to summer school. And I didn't have a problem going to summer school, but that was a no-no. So that was an embarrassment. So I ended up graduating from high school and was told by my guidance counselor at the time that I should do something kind of dumbed down. So I took early childhood education, but then took other things as I went along, a course here, a course there, and did all right in it. Like like Caitlin said, I had no idea that I could read, that I could write so well, or and in Truro at post-secondary, there were a lot of Indigenous people in my classes. And so we all kind of had that same, shyness, I guess. And I credit my love of books and reading for teaching me to be vocal and self-aware. And I would just get my hands on any sort of self-help book I could to understand why I was the way I was, or why people thought I was weird, and speak up. And I became a fighter instead. So rather than, fade into the background, I became a scrapper, because that's what I needed to do. I stuck up for myself and others. And so that's how I managed to get through. And my life, I've done all right in my life, but I'm not where I could be because of the way I was treated in high school, and because I'm 56, and because I became a single mom, and I had to get out there and work, and because I could never afford to go to school. Like Rowan talked about, I couldn't afford to go to school after my parents had saved up so much money for me to go to the post-secondary I was at. That was it. Once you take one thing, you were done. So there was no hope of ever, going to university. University was for rich kids and white kids, because I didn't have any friends that went to university. And definitely where I grew up, we had a huge Black community also, and they didn't go to university either. So we were kind of like the outcasts, and we took little college programs or business programs or something like that. And some really, really smart Indigenous kids went to CBU, which was, UCCB at the time. And it was the College of Cape Breton back then, and took Native studies. And so, we all had our own barriers. We had our barriers when we got to college. I cried from September to December and continued to drink, and managed to get B's in that program while I was drinking all the time. So, what could I have done if? And that never leaves me, so I plan to just continue on from the time I'm 56 till I die. I'm going to keep studying things. I'm going to keep reading things, and I'm going to keep, doing what I have to do for my own brain, and for my own self, and for my own spirit, and for these students that are looking at me, to help them to realize that they can do anything that they want to do. That is my job. That is the biggest part of my job. Thanks. Wow, I don't think I've ever said that out loud before.
Thanks, Patty. Okay, I'm so overwhelmed with the amazing responses, gang. Thanks for everything so far. I have Gabriel. We haven't heard from you in a while, and you're next in the circle. Would you add anything to what we're talking about?
I would say a lot of my issues, like in K to 12, were a lot of what Trenton talked about with regards to classes and representation, and there really being none. I grew up in Ottawa, but I grew up in a very white neighborhood and a very racist neighborhood. And so a lot of what was said once they found out that I was Indigenous, because I have the privilege of being white passing, was, oh, you're good at this for an Indigenous woman, or oh, you're good at this for being what you are, right? And there's still some of that. Some of that comes into, like, even in my program here, some of it you can see people like do a double take a little bit, and I don't want to put words in people's mouths, like my professors or anything, but you can kind of see it in their eyes when you're like, oh yes, I am Indigenous and I'm good at this, you know? So there is a lot of that, and that's all I would add.
Thank you, Gabriel. Amber, I think we're coming along with you. Hey.
Okay, so speaking to like my personal transition to university, like I feel like I've always like done well in school, and like I feel like I put on like a lot of that pressure like on myself, and like recognizing that like even with like in middle school I chose to take like the French program instead of like the Malice program, because like people were like saying how, you know, like it's not going to help you get a job or like go to university and stuff. So like I put on a lot of pressure on myself. But like even like when I came to university, like within my first week, I felt like I was lost, and like I didn't know any of the other Indigenous students here. Like I didn't know about like what like Patty does, and like I went out to see her like in the first couple of days, and like that really helped me because like I knew that like there was someone there for me. So I think like having those support systems and like recognizing what Indigenous students have to give up to come to university, like you're leaving your community, which like to me is like everything, and like my family, like, you know, like being a role model for like my siblings, and like just realizing that like all of the teachings that like I would give to them, or like the teachings that I would receive from like elders and like family members, like knowing that like the university and like Patty and like a team of people are like trying to implement like cultural resources and like ceremonies and stuff like that is like something that I think that should definitely be more incorporated, because, you know, like we're giving up all of this to be like a role model and give back to our community while, you know, situated in a colonial institution that like stripped that from us and like is trying to like, you know, like take away our language. So like, and I did have the opportunity of taking the Mi'kmaq class last semester or last year, which was like, I was very honored to do so, but it's also like not my language. So I kind of felt like I was like an imposter to like learn that, but I was like still really thankful to like be taught by an elder and like have that experience. But I think like another thing that I was thinking of is having like more involvement with the ISSG and like representation within the university, whether that like that be like artwork or like, you know, just having people being able to gather and stuff, although like that is difficult in these times. But like meeting like Rowan and Raven, like I wouldn't have done that without the ISSG. So like props to you, like Spencer's group for starting that. Like there's a lot more work to be done, but I'm glad to be part of that process.
Thank you so much. Amber, thanks so much. Amanda, what would you add?
It's hard to follow these strong voices. What can we do better? I think that post-secondary institutions need to do better in honoring truth and reconciliation. Truth and reconciliation has been a concept that is, it's a really, for me personally, it's a sacred concept, especially since I come from, I'm a descendant of survivors of the residential school system. So what the Truth and Reconciliation Commission proposed as Truth and Reconciliation is something I value very deeply, because it required opening up these wounds and doing a dive into historical trauma and like learning about our legacy. And as in Canada, we'd be doing a serious disservice to survivors if we didn't really honor the spirit and intent of truth and reconciliation, much like honoring the spirit and intent of the treaties. But the term reconciliation it's substantive. It comes from work. It comes from work of the TRC. There's a definition to it. There are calls to action that flow from it. And there's been subsequent inquiries, like the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Inquiry that released calls to justice. Prior to that, there's the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So reconciliation cannot and should not ever mean purely symbolic acts, those acts that are easy to do. It requires a fundamental shift in relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. And I think that a lot of the work of TRC, it gets stifled by how TRC becomes interpreted from the perspective of institutions, as opposed to TRC work done in relationship with Indigenous people. And we saw that same issue happen with the treaties that were signed with Indigenous peoples. Those treaties are sacred documents signed by our ancestors that meant something very specific between Indigenous peoples and the nation state of Canada. So I think that post-secondary institutions have a ways to go to truly internalize what truth and reconciliation means, what treaty relationship means, and then demonstrating accountability to fulfilling what those promises are. And fulfilling those promises aren't, they're not things we've done nicely to show, to extend our hand to Indigenous peoples. These are a fundamental right. So if truth and reconciliation work feels easy and feels happy, then chances are that work should probably be re-examined, because it requires a lot of different conversations. It requires dismantling colonialism, and it requires unpacking anti-Indigenous racism. So I think post-secondary institutions really need to look at and grapple with and have ceremony with truth and reconciliation and the treaties. And furthermore, I want to add that it's been a teaching from my elders, Wabanaki elders, and from my own family, that every person is born with an inherent gift. That means every single Indigenous person is born with an inherent gift. And that is so counterintuitive to treating Indigenous students as a problem to be solved. We actually have an inherent gift. We have an intact knowledge system, and they have every right to be supported in fulfilling their inherent gifts. And I think Patty spoke to that really beautifully in trying to help students, do the best that they can do with what they have. So because our students have inherent gifts, I know that there's some pushback against when Indigenous students speak truth to power. And I want educational institutions to trouble the racist stereotype that Indigenous students are being troublemakers, or that they are not maintaining peaceful or respectful relations. They exist in systems that were designed to extinguish their indigeneity. So any act that they do that is of resistance is a fighting spirit that is inherited from our ancestors, because Indigenous peoples would have been wiped out a long time ago if it was not for the fighting spirit of our ancestors. So I'm kind of done with the stereotype that an Indigenous student is being a troublemaker. I want educators to look at that as them reclaiming their fighting spirit that our ancestors have demonstrated since the beginning of colonization. And they have inherent gifts, and they are being knowledge seekers, and we are in their educational journey. So we have a responsibility to honor and uphold that.
Thank you, Amanda. Such great teachings. Rowan, I think last but not least, your turn.
Yeah, so I sort of have the triad of whiteness that affects how I've gone up through school. The first being, I went to an almost all-white elementary and junior high school, and I've had to listen to my history in an unceded territory being taught by white people, and subscribing to the notion of pan-indigeneity rather than actually talking about the culture that exists in this space. And often it's not correct because it's, oh, here's an Ojibwe teaching, here's a Cree teaching, here's a Dakota teaching, here's a Haida teaching, but we're going to package it as this whole thing rather than actually talking about what each of those things is made up of, or how different groups within Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island have different traditions and different thoughts. We also, because of being a Roman Catholic school, we had the most kind, white approach to all of these difficult subjects if they were talked about at all. We still got the wrong Thanksgiving teachings. We still got the wrong Columbus Day teachings. And anywhere else Indigenous issues were mentioned, it was extra reading that you do on your own. The second being burnout culture. My parents told me when I was really young, do not tell anyone that you're brown. Don't say it because you're going to get judged. And we don't want that for you. And I've been imparted with that value as being vocal as an Indigenous student. I have to be giving 200% all the time. And it really goes to show that anyone who wants to be Indigenous has to be performing for academia all the time. If someone messes up or does something that's not acceptable in this space, they become another problem native rather than a human who makes mistakes sometimes. And there's none of that leniency that other students have. Like, the way people approach students of color versus white students is entirely different, whether it's conscious or not. And the third kind of big pillar that affects my experience within academia is that Indigenous knowledge is not seen as the academic ideal. It's never been part of the curriculum until now, when people are like, oh my God, this is horrible, we need to fix it. And all of that weight is still thrown on Indigenous peoples rather than coming directly from the institution. So Indigenous students who want to be recognized as such and want to have this part of our culture are putting in so much extra work to make sure it's correct, because often it's approached incorrectly and done wrong. I've had some of my classmates come up to me because I'm also in the music program here at Mount A, and have told me, hey, can you come talk about this? Can you come talk about your culture? Can you come talk about racism? Because the way we're doing it now doesn't have any people of color doing it. So it's white people making white decisions about how white actions affect brown people. And that is really unacceptable for how Indigenous students are supposed to operate in a space, but also that we're treated as these wealths of knowledge that can be drawn upon at any point.
Thank you, Rowan. You really bring up a good point, which is a great segue into, and we have 15 minutes left. I want to honor everyone's time. So I'm wondering about youth voice. I'm wondering about being in the system here, the public school system. And if you could think about what maybe you wish would have gone differently, or what you think could work differently in terms of ensuring that Indigenous voices of our youth in the system are elevated in a good way. So I'm going to go to, yeah, Patty?
This is a really good opportunity to say one thing. I think that for anyone who's listening that is an educator at all, if you have an Indigenous student in your class and you know that there's an Indigenous student in your class, please, please, please do not assume that they are culturally competent, or if they are, that they want to speak up. Please don't single them out. Please, please, please don't say, so why don't you tell us about your culture? Why don't you tell us about your community? If they want to do that, they will speak up. If they don't, then assume they don't want to speak up. Because I think, like Rowan said, being called on to educate others is not why they're at post-secondary, or not why they're in grade 6, or not why they're in grade 11. And, you know, wait until they offer that. That's it.
Thanks. So rather than call on people to speak to that, is there anyone that would want to share what would be the best way to ensure that that folks in the system are being good allies by providing space in a good way? No one's putting their hand up.
I can talk again if you're.
That would be awesome. Go, Rowan.
I think there are sort of two big things that come to mind right off the bat. And one is having mandatory Indigenous studies, saying this needs to be part of the curriculum. It needs to be taught by Indigenous people who are properly educated and properly compensated for their time, just not having people float through university without knowing anything, because I've seen it happen. I've seen a lot of people when the Digby fiasco happened a couple months ago, people were like, what are these treaties that we have signed on to? I don't know what they mean. Can you help? So it's obvious that there's a missing piece in how it's approached from the land we're on, but also trauma information. A lot of Indigenous issues intersect so closely with transphobia, with colorism, with ableism, with women's rights, with complex trauma and mental health issues, that isolating Indigenous issues from all of these other spheres does a disservice to everyone, because not only are there such complexities in the way that Indigenous people navigate the world, but there are also unique solutions within Indigenous cultures and teachings that can bring together not only Indigenous students, but non-Indigenous students who can observe and learn from these teachings as well.
Thank you so much, Rowan. I see Spencer's hand up. Spencer?
Hi. So I know I'm just supposed to be a listener, but that was a good question that was posed. I think the problem is like in the initial thinking that like, oh, I only should be doing this if there are Indigenous students in my class. And that's problematic because when it's like out of sight, out of mind, there's no problem, right? And in my experience, in my practicum, in my experience, speaking with other educators in my cohort for the education program, a lot of it's like, you know, it only ever comes up if they like, oh, if there are Indigenous students in my class, this is what I would do. And I roll my eyes because it's like, oh, because you got caught, you know, like, but the reality is that these institutions, a lot of these educational institutions are founded and exist on unceded and unsurrendered territories, right? In New Brunswick, it's Wolastoqey and Mi'kmaq territories, right? So why is it that these non-Indigenous communities are not extending their knowledge without, you know, like just by doing it? Like they're not just going and doing it themselves. They have to be put in the corner that there's an Indigenous student in your class. Oh, you have to teach them this. It's like, no, you should be learning this anyway. This should be part of your education, like pedagogy. This whole thing, your style, your method should be Indigenous. You should be taking in all this information. You're not relying on whether or not you're going to get an Indigenous student. That seems like you're kind of gambling on a lottery, right? But Indigenous students exist in your classroom whether you know it or not. And as you know, you're saying like, don't call on Indigenous students to like describe their whole culture and everything. You know, that's true. But at the same time, like, why aren't you making it comfortable for all students to be talking about this? And making it known that your teaching is visible for them. Look at your materials. Look at who's writing your books. Look who is creating. Who's making these decisions for your class. Like at the district level, like, okay, who is, you know, who's in charge? Who's making these decisions? Are Indigenous people involved actively? Are they engaged in curriculum development and material? So it's not so much just like what should you do when you get an Indigenous student, right? We've been here for thousands of years longer than non-Indigenous people have. We know what to do when we get there. We know what to do when we get into these schools. It's on it's on Canada's side now. Like, you know, like you have to do your work.
Thank you for sharing that, Spencer. We've got about 5 minutes left, gang. If anyone would like to add anything at all to the conversation, would love to hear from you. Trenton, did you give me a wave or were you just waving at someone? Okay.
No,
Go
I'm just yeah, just to like build on like what Spencer said. I think a lot of big change would happen if there were more Indigenous people at the administrative level, at the district level, where these big decisions are being made. You know, with curriculum and what gets into the education systems, there needs to be more input from Indigenous people. And I think that would bring about a big change, as well as, you know, teachers and staff at schools and universities. I feel like, you know, more Indigenous representation is key to build a system that works for both worlds. And I think it's important. But fundamentally, we we really need our own systems, our own education system, an Indigenous one, because it removes that transition, right? Like we wouldn't have to transition to a different way of life and a different system in a different place, like if those systems were in our communities. That's what it boils down to. A system that's built for us, it would work for us. There would be, there's a lot more to it, but those are the things that come to mind when I think about this.
Yeah, no more assimilation. No more assimilation. Many of us want to be grounded in our knowledge and our structures and systems, and we need to be supported to do the work to engage in that kind of revitalization, because our knowledges and structures and systems have experienced 500 years of colonial violence and oppression. So we need to be given the space and supported to engage in that reclamation work that we need to do, and stop trying to put us under this multicultural mosaic of Canada. We come from distinct nations. So Canada and Canadians have an obligation to be in nation-to-nation relationships with us as distinct peoples and rights holders.
I would like to say thank you, from the bottom of my heart, to first off, our students, the Mount Allison students, and graduate, Spencer. I would like to say thank you to you for speaking your truth and speaking up and allowing others to hear what you feel is important. And I would like to thank Amanda, Trenton, Caitlin, Natasha for sharing what you think is important and your truth, and just for being here and for supporting this webinar series, for supporting everything that we do at Mount Allison, because you all attend everything that you possibly can. And I'm so grateful for that. And I think together we are stronger, and there's no competition between us. We're all one big team, and it's really amazing. So I'd like to thank you for that. And I have to go to another meeting that I have to be at in 4 minutes. So you know how it is. Teams, if you got that 3-second window, there you get booked in. So and so I would like to just say I love you guys and thank you so much. And thank you, Tracy, for being my partner in crime and for caring and for agreeing to jump into one of my crazy ideas and make it your crazy idea too. So once it's all on YouTube and everything, then we'll certainly let everybody know so that you can promote it and share it with who needs to see it. And thanks to all the faculty and staff who attended today, because I see you there, even though you don't think I do.
Thanks, everyone. I know everyone has things that they need to get to, especially that beautiful stormy day out there. I'm sure everyone wants to go get some fresh air in the middle of the, I don't know, -25 weather we finally have this winter. But thank you so much, and thanks for trusting us with this, gang. I really, really appreciate that, and I learned a lot from all of you. So thanks so much. And if you want to stick around and chit chat, that's cool. But if you have to get on to things, we can say adieu until another time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Take care, everyone. Be well.